Tonight's topic is homeschool burnout, and I'm sure that we've all heard quite a bit about burnout over the years. I did a podcast cycle, two shows with my friend Tanya Tarr, and she is trained in martial arts and in coaching people through things like PTSD and burnout. And one of the things that she said that really struck me during this podcast is that sometimes we call something burnout that is actually fatigue or exhaustion. And so I want to start by just talking about fatigue, exhaustion, and burnout in just kind of a general way. When we embark on something as significant as the home education of our children, full time care and education of our kids, it is impossible not to become fatigued, to get tired, to feel a little like low motivation at times. If you've ever talked to a school teacher, this happens to them 5 days a week, standing on your feet all day, marshaling students in and out of classes, keeping them entertained, keeping their attention, tons of energy. You have that going on too. You are not only parenting your kids, but you are trying to keep them on task in a place designed for not being on task, right? The home is a place where you kick off your shoes. Oops, I'm wearing slippers, right? Because I'm at home. If I was on a stage, I'd be in high heels. So when we're at home, there's this letting down your hair effect, this feeling that you don't have to work hard because this is the place that you want to relax. So the idea is this, and there's two parts, by the way. You will love listening to these two. The feeling is this: you are trying to marshal energy toward intentional learning in a space that is pretty free flowing, relaxed, and meant to be kick your shoes off. And that sort of conflict between agendas can really lead to fatigue. Now, in my book, The Brave Learner, which you've all read and all have seen, I talk about really accommodating the feel of home when you're doing homeschooling so that your kids can really experience that feeling of hominess around their lessons. So maybe they snuggle up on the couch with a clipboard and they do their writing there. Or maybe while they're doing their math, they're snacking. Or maybe they get to let the cat sit in their lap and they pet the cat while they're doing their phonics worksheet. In other words, we're sort of harnessing the cozy energy of home to support the learning task. But even if that's the case, even if you feel like I'm harnessing the energy of home, it is impossible not to get tired. Routine is comforting and eventually boring and eventually fatiguing. Routine is comforting, boring, fatiguing. I had a therapist one time say to me that everything becomes wallpaper eventually. So whatever was new and exciting, eventually you stop seeing it. You know, people who live in really fancy homes where they've really been intentional about decorating and making sure that, everything is in place. You've got the Joanna Gaines kind of home. Eventually, you don't see what's on the wall anymore, no matter how beautiful Fixer Upper made your house. Because once we get familiar with something, it stops holding our attention. And what happens when something has stopped holding our attention and then boredom starts to kick in, we become tired because we become, what would the words be? Tired of it. Routine can be wonderful. Like there's a loveliness of knowing that meals happen 3 times a day and generally at the same time. There's a loveliness of knowing you start your day with read aloud. There's a loveliness of knowing that your babies nap at predictable times. But if that becomes the only means or mode of existence, at a certain point, somebody needs to disrupt it, to create intrigue, to get everyone energized again. Imagine, for instance, if you were in this situation where you've just every day, same thing, and now your kids start to get a little squirrely and you're trying really hard to enforce this routine. And then all of a sudden, your friend invites you over to do science experiments at their house for a day. Who doesn't want to leave? We don't say, well, gosh, no, the routine is so much more comforting. I really don't want to go do something new, novel, and exciting that someone else prepared. That just almost never happens, right? Because we're like, I need a break. I need something new. I need to be stimulated. I need the novelty. Remember the four forces of enchantment: surprise, mystery, risk, and adventure. When the routine becomes too familiar, we need to inject a little enchantment to kind of spark an awakening of energy. So even though the goal is to get this rhythm, get this routine, get this predictable pattern, because it sort of reassures us that homeschool is actually getting done, what's actually happening is eventually you get tired of it. And this weird fatigue kicks in. And that fatigue eventually makes you think you're burned out. You might even become exhausted by it. But I want you to just dig a little deeper and ask yourself, am I just maybe bored? Do I just need something new to chew on, to think about, to draw my attention, to upset the apple cart of this relentless predictability? Now, Tanya really cautions us not to use the language of burnt out until we really know we are. And I'll let you listen to her podcast because I won't do it justice. It was such a good two-pair podcast. So go back and listen to both of those episodes after this. But here's the big tweak. Here's what we're going to talk about tonight that maybe you weren't expecting when you came on to solve your burnout. So here's the big tweak. If you are feeling bored and tired, how do you think your kids are feeling? How do you think your kids are feeling? Do you think they're like, oh, this is so comforting? I really don't want to change the routine. How many of you are seeing signs of boredom and tiredness in your kids? Now, I saw someone say, two love it, two hate it. Some kids really love the routine. They can crank through quickly, and then they're like, okay, now the rest of the day is mine. But how many of you are seeing in your kids signs of squirreliness, resistance, kicking their feet under the table, picking at their sister, rolling their eyes, not doing as much work as they used to do? Like maybe they used to be able to do 15 math problems quickly, and now they're barely getting 10 done, and you're nagging them. How many of you are feeling that? Yes, it feels like you're pulling teeth, tons of resistance. But here's what I think we forget about. Our children are sort of like weather vanes, right? Like wherever the wind is blowing, that's where they're going. So they're not really perceptive in the analysis sense. They don't say to themselves, we've been doing this routine for 4 months. I notice I'm a little bored and tired. What could I do for myself to sort of re-inject some energy into my day? Right? Most kids are not talking like that. Most kids are like in their bodies, and they're suddenly like, I've seen this workbook and I already know what it is. And now I have to do more. How many of you know that, right? They're just like their body reactions. They're like pushing the workbook away, or they're kicking their feet, or they're picking at their sister, because that's their way of expressing that the current structure stopped working. Because what they're saying is, this thing has become wallpaper. It's no longer holding my attention. But here's what we typically do when that occurs. We try to make things fun. We're like, I know, I will tap dance. You know, I'm going to bring out the fancy markers. And of course, I've told you to do some of those. Or you've read my book and you're like, we'll just light one more candle, you know, and you get out the candle and you light it and you think, this will save math. It might. It might for a minute. But what if it doesn't? What if you guys have really hit a wall? This is like more like fatigue or exhaustion than just momentary boredom. What do you do when it's burning down? Okay, so before I go on, here's the question I want you to answer. Have you ever talked to your kids about burnout, about fatigue, boredom, losing interest? How many of you have done that? But I want to start here in this place where some of you do know to talk to your kids about it, and some of you have never thought to do it. What I know about homeschool from my memory of it is that the mother, who's typically the homeschooler, shoulders the load for planning, for execution, for keeping it entertaining and fun, for relieving stress, for helping kids get along, for mediating trouble, for tap dancing and creating and building the space, all with the secret hope that this one trick is going to result in a cooperative child who's happy. Do you know what I'm talking about? And so here's what happens. Here's what happens. When you take on that role, then your kids only have one way of communicating that they're tired, bored, and burned out. And that is not cooperating with your agenda. And doesn't that just increase your sense of alienation, resentment, and burnout when that occurs? It's like, wait, after all I've done for you, you know, I even bought you your favorite foods to eat with math. How is that not good enough? Right? That's the kind of feeling because your kids are not self aware like an adult is. So the only way they can communicate to you that what's going on isn't working is to resist you, to tell you through their behavior. So let's see if we flip it around. We start observing, oh, this one really doesn't like math. This one keeps picking at her sister. This one rolls around on the floor when I tell him to come in for the read aloud time. Like, just start noticing if the seams are fraying, if there's an unraveling of the routine through defiance, silliness, quirkiness, making inappropriate jokes, playing with the dog when they should be sitting at the table, like all that stuff. And then have a family meeting. You don't need to call it that, by the way. Just do it over breakfast and say, hey, you guys, I am so bored. Are you guys bored? I'm kind of bored right now. Feels like the fun we were having before winter break has kind of gone away, and I'm like dreading this week. Well, how are you feeling? Lead by example. Name your feeling. Describe it in some detail, not over detail. Don't use psychological terms. Don't use the word burnout. Use language that your kids understand. I'm bored. I'm tired of this. This seems dumb. Use that kind of language. We used to love this math book, and now I just like hate opening it. How do the rest of you feel? Because if you start opening the conversation, you're actually teaching your kids to use their words to communicate how they're doing instead of their bodies and behavior. But you have to go first. You don't have to pretend to love homeschooling or that the routine is making you happy right now if you are tired and bored. You can go first. You can have breakfast and say, wow, oh my gosh, I thought about it this week and the thought of opening XYZ book just made me irritated. Do you guys ever feel like that? Is that happening for anyone right now? Like that. When you uncork this little geyser, you might be surprised at what you get back. A child might tell you, oh, I really like that book, but what I really hate is the pencil. Why do I have to use this kind of pencil? Can I just do math in pen? You might find out something if you have this conversation. You can also, once you've started to get the feelings out, invite them to think of solutions. Now, I saw someone say in here that they even invited their children to take a deep breath, journal their feelings, take minutes apart, just go outside for a few minutes. Yes, this is what I wanted to encourage. Let's make a list of ways that we can re-up our own energy level. I was at this, Brave Writer has a fund that is our donation fund. And we like to support worthy projects that we think are good with some of the proceeds that we earn through Brave Writer. And so there's this one organization called Summer Camp Reading here in Cincinnati that helps third graders going into fourth grade who need extra support in learning to read. So Cindy and I went downtown to watch one of these classes in session 2 summers ago, which was incredible. Amazing teachers. But here's the thing that I really loved, and I was thinking about this today when I was preparing for tonight. In the classroom, they had 2 gymnastics mats at the back of the room. And while the kids were sitting on the floor, they discovered kids did better sitting on the floor than in desks. First of all, yes, yes, yes. Kids love the floor. They should do work on the floor, sit on the floor, roll around on the floor. The floor is amazing for children. So all these kids sat on the floor. But if they started to feel squirrely or that their attention was fading, they were allowed to get up and go back to the gymnastics mat and do yoga stretches, which they had taught them the first week of these classes. They could even do non-yoga stretches, but they gave them some stretches like downward dog and the lotus position and, just various stretches. And what I thought was so brilliant is Cindy and I are sitting there, and it was almost like an orchestra. You would just see these kids pop up, go to the mat, do 3 or 4 exercises, and then go back and sit down. It was and then as they would sit down, another one would get up and go, and it just happened sort of seamlessly because these kids had been taught that they were not only allowed to do that, but they were kind of expected to, right? Because that's why the mat was there. That's why they were taught it. And I thought about that. For Christmas this year, I bought my granddaughter a gymnastics mat because she's taking gymnastics right now from IKEA. They are $49. That would be an amazing thing to bring into your family, something that they could go to when they're sitting at the table and they're struggling with math. They could go to the mat after their third problem when they're bored and go do some stretches and then come back and finish. But we don't give our kids tools for coping with their depression or with their boredom or with their fatigue. We end up sort of shaming them into cooperating. And here's the piece that I want you to really think about. So much of your fatigue is hurting burned out children. So much of your boredom is being the enforcer. So when we're like, oh, go take a bubble bath or make sure you give your kids to a friend to babysit so you have an hour to yourself. Yes, do all those things. But what's really bothering you in your homeschool is that feeling of inertia and not being synced up the way that you were like during the first month when everything was new and people were kind of willing to get into the routine. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you are at the point where you're bored and you're fatigued and you're heading towards exhaustion, evaluate how much of that is fighting children who have already gotten there, who are telling you with their behavior, hey, I am tired of this. Let's try the yoga mat where you do these yoga exercises anytime you start to get sick of copy work and you go and do some and then you come back. Now, I'm here to tell you, for some kids, the first thing they're going to do is test you. And they're going to write one word, go to the yoga mat. Write a second word, go to the yoga mat. Write a third word, go to the yoga mat. Celebrate it as a win. Don't say they're taking advantage of you. Don't treat it like they're manipulating the situation. This might be the degree to which they need to prove to themselves that they have the right to take care of themselves when they get bored, fatigued, exhausted, or burned out. Does that make sense? So just embrace it and try it for a week. See what happens. The first step, though, is to recognize that they need the opportunity to make that connection. It's not enough to just say to a child who's bored, fatigued, and annoyed to go get on the yoga mat, because that almost feels like punishment or another good idea, like lighting the candle. It has to come from within them, and it has to be a meaningful match for the feeling they're having. So maybe when they say, yeah, I'm tired too, I'm bored too, we could say, let's think of some boredom busters. Let's think of some things we do when we're fatigued. Let's think of some things we might try when we feel antsy. And let's give it a week and see how that goes. And you feed back to me whether something worked or not. Did the candle help or did it not? Was snacking a good idea or wasn't it? Give them more agency. Give them more agency to make these decisions and to check in with themselves. Did it work? Now, occasionally, you really do need to switch things up. For instance, with math, maybe you've been using a curriculum since September and you want to take either February or March to just play board games and video games for math. You say, you know what? We're taking a break from the workbooks. We'll come back to them in April. But right now, we're going to play board games, card games, video games. We're going to build our own games. We're going to learn about gaming theory. And that's what we're going to do instead of math. And then we'll come back to the workbooks in April or late March or whatever. In other words, there is some power in disrupting the routine to establish a new routine, to do sort of a unit study to replace the drudgery of the workbook. because by now, whatever system you've been using since September is frayed, the edges aren't sharp, the pages are familiar, the practices are old. And so it's time to change it up, to inject something new. Somebody asked, what do you do about a teenager who goes on the computer and you've lost him for the rest of the day? Maybe don't see it as losing him. Maybe see it as a learning opportunity. I don't know what he's doing on the computer, but that's where a lot of learning is taking place today. But maybe before he gets on the computer, maybe if you set a time that begins, like let's say computer time always starts after 2. So the morning and the lunchtime are as a family. Then within those hours, come up with other meaningful ways. Maybe your teen needs to go for a walk or shoot baskets, or maybe your teen needs to chop wood or to take the dog for a run, like something that really gets their adrenaline going and gets their body moving. Maybe they need a weightlifting set and they could be working out in the basement, like go down and do a couple of sets. One person told me, and I wish I had known to do this. They said they got a bar. Here's my finger, got a bar and put it across an open doorway, not where a door is, but like one of those open ways you walk through. And teenagers would hang on it and work on pull-ups while they were listening to the read aloud or in between math problems, so that they were literally physically using their bodies. Boys in particular really respond to that. They could even set challenges for themselves. Like, I'm trying to get to where I can do 25 push-ups without a break. So I'm going to practice doing 5 push-ups at a time after every 10 problems of math. Like, that's the kind of sort of lateral thinking that you could build with a teen. But you actually have to have conversations where you make these suggestions, you see if it's interesting in their minds, and then you do it together. One idea that I wanted to share for teens, I just got at this artificial intelligence meetup I go to that has over 150 people at it every month in Cincinnati. There are a whole bunch of university students there and a professor, in addition to people from the business community here. And this professor talked about his artificial intelligence class that he teaches. He teaches many of them. He's the department head. And he talked about how he was helping his students before they learned to build AI programming, chat GPTs, all that stuff. He wants them to have an understanding of what it is to be responsible and ethical with artificial intelligence. So he asks them to make a movie to see if they can explain responsible, ethical AI in a movie. And then they upload those movies. These are college kids, to TikTok. And whoever gets the highest viewership gets a prize. So the audience is not the professor, it's the TikTok audience. And they dive in, man. They're like manipulating video editing. They're deep diving into the ethics and what responsible AI is. They're recording their voices. They're competing with each other, but they're also like totally into it. And I saw the winning video just this last week. It got over 600,000 views on TikTok. This is a University of Cincinnati class on AI, taking advantage of the video editing skills of this generation to produce a meaningful project on something as sophisticated as responsible and ethical artificial intelligence. Mind blown. So if you think about your teens, that's why I said maybe the computer is your solution, but what are they doing on it? What are they doing on it? If where they're struggling right now is they're bored with math, maybe there is a correlation between the math that they're working on that feels very abstract and an actual use that could be discovered online that shows up in real life or programming or some other aspect of their computer use. I can't even think about it that way because I'm so not a mathy person, but my kids found ways on their own to make math interesting. I think I've shared this before, but Noah, when he got into programming in high school, he started building what do you call them? Like times tables for base 12. That meant he had to invent 2 more digits and then carry them through all of his multiplication. It was not easy. It took him a while. That's so much better than just cranking through pages of math that he already understands. So, as you are exploring burnout for yourself, I want you to really take seriously helping your kids develop that language, helping them express what's going on. You go first, they go second, and then actually coming up together with meaningful ways to address, what do we say? Boredom, fatigue, exhaustion, and potential burnout. Now, for kids who are truly burned out, the way that you'll know that is that nothing moves the needle. And at that point, there could be something else going on, and it's worth it to find out what it is. It could be a learning disability that is undiagnosed. It could be that they are being bullied somewhere and you don't know about it. It could be that they had some exchange with a relative. You know what I'm saying? Like there could be something else. Burnout is when the normal practices that help revive us flatline. And so pay attention to that, especially with teens, because you never know what's going on. Believe me, you actually don't know. You think you know because they're in your house all the time and you feel like you're supervising them, but you actually don't know. I have found out so much stuff from my kids in their 20s and 30s. They watched whole TV shows that I didn't even know they were watching. They're like, oh, yeah, we saw that whole series. I'm like, wait, which one? What was it called? It's crazy. You live in the same house, but it's two different worlds. So pay attention to that very high level of burnout. If you have one of those kids and you're working on a diagnosis and plan, how do you deal with education in the meantime? I think the diagnosis and the plan is the education, because becoming self-aware enough to be able to manage yourself is the primary skill that they will learn. And then the quote, school stuff will just happen once those things are really in place. And guess what? 18 is not a finish line. They can start college at 20 or 22. They can take the time they need to become able to manage their lives. I was about to ask on opinions of what to do with an ADHD child who easily goes through the stages of boredom, fatigue, etc. So with these diagnoses, you have to determine, probably with a therapist, whether or not medications would help, what the practices actually are. So learning how is the education. Learning how to manage your learning challenge is the first education, is the most crucial step in the next processes. Because then once you know how to learn within the constraints of your particular diagnosis, then you can learn anything. You're not fighting yourself all the time. So let me just sum up, because we're coming up to the end here. You are in charge of learning for your family. There is no deadline. There is no right method. There is no correct pace. There is no such thing as enough or not enough. There is only today. There is only the children you have. There's only the limit to your curiosity that you have in this moment. And your job is to keep coordinating resources that match the felt need. That's your only job. And if your child suddenly gets to high school and they didn't have enough science, they're going to take it in high school. And if they didn't master composition in high school, they're going to take it in college. And if they didn't get it in college, they're going to teach themselves when they're 35. I didn't read Jane Austen until my 30s. Thank goodness. I enjoyed the books. They were not ruined for me by a professor. I literally felt like it was this secret gift waiting for me in my 30s. And when I opened this package, it was the most delightful experience of my life. Because here's the lie that makes you tired, that you are not doing what you should be. But who decided what you should be doing? Who is this mythical voice? And in the internet era, there's hundreds, thousands of mythical voices, and many of them are on your phone right now. And every day they're telling you 3 steps to do X, and here's what needs to happen. Just mute all that stuff. You know what I wish your Instagram feed was? Artwork, beautiful pictures of nature, music, dancers, interesting ideas that have nothing to do with homeschool. You already know enough about homeschool. Gosh, the Brave Learner Home has more help than you could ever use in a lifetime of homeschool. So stop obsessing and just do what you know and actually inhabit the moment that you are with your children and experience the joy of learning, not trying to keep pace with some imaginary script that some unknown person handed you, whether it's leftover from public school or your best friend in the co-op or your husband who works for the school system. Drop all of that. Be with your children. Tell the truth of your experience, solicit theirs, and collaborate so that all of you are on the same page and you're meaningfully addressing the felt experience of being together in a homeschool environment. All right. I did say something about the spring. Unschooling. Let yourself devolve into unschooling. Let yourself go outside, go to the art museum, take advantage of less structure, and don't feel guilty about it. Starting in March or April, let the workbooks come to a gracious end. You don't have to make any big declarations. Just let them sort of slide off the table and then go do and be and enjoy. If your child gets up and they start building with Lego, don't announce anything. Just start helping them build with Lego and ignore the fact that you usually did copy work at that time of day. Just start sliding into that unschooling spirit and let it carry you to the end of the year. All right, guys, I'm going to sign off. I love you. If you need anything, come find me on social media, Inside Community Coaching, wherever you are looking. And I'm here to cheer you on. Keep going. I am totally rooting for you. Good night, everyone.